My colleagues manage with this, so stop complaining when you haven't contributed to the ascent. That's what James exclaimed as he threw $300 at me for our monthly expenses. The kind husband I thought I had was nowhere to be found. Holding on to that money, I smiled brightly and replied, I contribute $2,000 to our home every month. Seeing the shocked look on James's face, I stood up to meet his gaze. Do you even know our monthly rent? What are you talking about? It's probably around $100, right? Even if we lived in rural Nebraska, can you really expect to rent a 3-bedroom apartment with soundproofing for just $100? Holding back my urge to yell, I quietly placed the divorce lawyer's business card on the desk. Whoa, what's gotten into you? Calm down. James tried to soothe me, his lips quivering. But I calmly responded, it's not sudden, it's all according to plan. I stared at James with cold eyes, his shock rendering him speechless. My revenge had only just begun. My name is Emily Parker. I'm a 35-year-old housewife and a piano teacher. Before getting married, I worked at a music school, but after marriage, I started offering private lessons at home. Juggling household chores, childcare, and teaching piano, my days are pretty packed. I married James when I was 28. We met at a charity concert organized by the piano school where I worked. James helped coordinate equipment and acted as a liaison between us and the venue. He wasn't exactly adept at his job, but he was quick to bond with the venue staff, ensuring smooth negotiations. James asked for my contact information on our way home from the after-party of the competition. I accepted James's invitation for a date, and we began to go out together. Before I knew it, our relationship blossomed, and we got married on our 3rd anniversary. James and I have 2 children. One is a boy who looks just like James, and the other is a girl who looks just like me. People often say that boys resemble their mothers and girls their fathers, but in our case, it was the exact opposite. We used to joke about that. We were a very close-knit family, always going shopping together. However, once our children started elementary school, James began acting strange. I'll be home late again. You've been busy lately, haven't you? My husband, who only occasionally worked overtime at the beginning or end of the month, suddenly had many late nights. He would always come home late, reeking of alcohol. He mentioned that since he switched to a sales job, he had a lot of client dinners. I thought, gee, working in a company must be tough. Thankfully, since I didn't accept students for evening piano lessons, our children were never left alone at night. Because of this, I felt a strong responsibility to support James to the best of my ability. However, he gradually began to show a colder attitude towards me. At first, it was small complaints about meals or housekeeping, but soon he started nitpicking about how I spent money. Hey, what's for dinner today? It's unfair that the meal for the breadwinner, which is me, is the same as for you and the kids. Mine should be more extravagant. Well, I work too, you know, and the kids are growing. They need proper meals. Stop being so selfish. Only young women can get away with that. Stop making excuses and listen to me. Forget it. I'm gonna eat out. With that, James left, leaving me and the kids in shock. I felt anger rising, but seeing my children frightened by James's outburst, I decided it was more important to comfort them. I chose not to worry about where James went. But from that day on, James's behavior changed drastically. Apart from weekday overtime, he also started working more weekends. Despite complaining, I saw a delighted James getting ready, and I couldn't help but feel this isn't about work. Women's intuition, as they say. Observing James closely, I started noticing red flags. He never had an interest in fashion before, but suddenly he began buying brands that younger people would like. He also started spending late nights on the phone out on our balcony, and I noticed a transaction for women's jewelry on our credit card statement. The final straw came when James began dictating how our household expenses should be managed. All these years, you've been overspending, which limited what I could do. From now on, our monthly budget is $300. Got it? $300. That's impossible. Just the groceries for the four of us cost over $500. That's because you're being extravagant. From now on, I'll spend as I please. If you want to spend money, earn more yourself. True to his word, James only gave me $300 from the next month. I managed with my earnings and some savings, but it wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle James expected. For the first time, I seriously considered divorce. Whether there was another woman or not, I used to think it was okay if he came back to us before the kids grew up. But when I thought about whether my children needed a father who acted irresponsibly and didn't care for his family, I felt that maybe we didn't need James. I was still hesitant, but then something happened that made my decision clear. It was a Sunday morning, and I was making breakfast. James, who usually leaves early, was still home. The kids went into his bedroom, hoping to play with him. Then, with a loud voice that could probably be heard outside, James yelled at them, "Would you shut up? Hey, why'd you yell out of nowhere like that? Isn't taking care of the kids your job? Stop slacking off." He snapped at me. "You're their father too, you know," I replied. I don't need noisy kids around. I'm trying to get some rest here." "Keep 'em quiet," he retorted. I held back from saying out loud what I was really thinking. "The reason you're tired is probably because you've been staying out late every night, maybe cheating on me." The kids were clearly frightened, hiding behind me. Seeing them like that solidified the idea of divorce in my mind. I needed to protect my kids. As I looked at James, now snoring loudly in bed, I made up my mind. Later, I started by checking my own finances. Could I maintain our lifestyle while continuing my classes from home? And what about the kids' future? To my surprise, I realized I could sustain our lifestyle on my income alone. The reason our expenses had shot up was because of the family credit card we both used. James seemed to forget it was a family card and had been using it liberally. Sometimes, the bills even exceeded $1,000 a month. I had only been checking the total amounts, but James's charges started increasing right around when he began working late. They were all at fancy restaurants and hotels, the kind you go to for a romantic getaway. As I realized he might be using our family card for trysts with his affair, my love for James cooled to absolute zero. Confronting him now might just make him hide the affair, so I decided to make sure our finances were rock solid and then corner him once everything was set. About 3 months after learning about James's affair, I managed to gather all the evidence. James had no idea I was onto him, so gathering evidence was a breeze. No need for a private investigator. Then, on James's payday, I decided it was time to make my move. James was in high spirits that morning, maybe getting ready for a date with his mistress. He was humming while picking out his clothes. I approached him cautiously and said, "Hey, isn't it payday today? The $300 you've been giving for household expenses isn't cutting it. I think you'd understand if you checked our finances." "Will you stop with the excuses? It's all your incompetence. You've ruined my mood," he snapped angrily. I persisted, "But it's not enough. At this rate, we might have to sell the house." James sighed dramatically and ran his fingers through his hair. He took out his wallet, pulled out 3 bills, and waved them at me. "My colleagues get by with this. You haven't contributed in a cent, so stop complaining," he said, throwing the $300 meant for our expenses at me. The kind and loving husband I had married was nowhere to be found. I clenched the money and smiled back at him. "I put $2,000 into our home every month," I stated. James looked at me with a blank expression. Standing up, I met his gaze and asked, "Do you even know how much the rent for this house is?" "What are you talking about?" It's probably around 100, right? Regardless of where we live, can you really believe we can live in a 3-bedroom house with a mortgage for just $100? I retorted, holding back my urge to yell. I quietly placed the divorce lawyer's business card on the desk. Michelle, what's going on? Calm down, James said, trying to soothe me with a twisted smile. It's not sudden, it's all according to plan, I replied coldly. James looked shocked, at a loss for words. I stared back with indifferent eyes. The revenge had only just begun. To make things clearer, I placed another set of documents on the table. Seeing them, James's face turned pale. What does this mean? He asked, flustered. These are my income statements and our household expenses, I explained, showing him our household ledger, the house contract, and a copy of the account book we report to the IRS. The ledger detailed our monthly expenses, and the house contract showed the monthly mortgage repayment. You're lying about the $1,000 rent, he accused. No matter how rural Nebraska is, it's a custom-built house with a soundproof room. There's no way we could live here for just $100 a month, I countered. The house we live in was custom-built when we had our child, with both our parents contributing to the down payment. It was my dream house, made possible by my job and our family's support. But even with our parents paying half the price up front, our monthly payments were higher than the neighboring rental properties. We did discuss the price with James at the time, but he brushed it off, saying, I'll leave it to you, Michelle. I used to think he trusted me, but now I see he just found the topic tedious. Why didn't you consult me properly? Isn't that a waste too? James argued. Oh, I did. You just didn't engage. Besides, half of the rent came from my piano lesson earnings, and ever since you only contributed $300 for living expenses, I've been covering everything else. You have no right to complain, I shot back. James was speechless but didn't look convinced. He glared at me then, as if recalling something, smirked. Fine, my bad about the rent, but you should have shown me these papers earlier. I would have thought about it then, he said. Who was the one barely home to discuss these matters? I retorted. All right then. Just add the rent to the $300 living expenses. If you have an income too, why should I bear all the expenses? He seemed to be on the defensive now, looking closely at the household ledger. He began marking it with a red pen. This, and this, all unnecessary expenses. We don't need these lessons. Look, it can be managed with $300. You just spend too much. So he has money for his mistress, but not for our children. I was boiling inside, but it was too early to bring that up. I glanced at the clock and then gave James a sweet smile. Do you know the average monthly grocery bill for a family of 4? Around $120, ain't it? That's why $300 is more than enough. On average, it's $870. What? That's right. The average for a family of 4 is close to $900. Our grocery bills are usually around $600. That's after cutting corners wherever possible. James was lost in thought. Why didn't he realize that living on $300 a month was impossible? I began to feel a headache coming on. So, you can't live on $300. Do you get that? No way. What? It's a lie. James started acting like a child, vehemently denying the truth. I looked at him in disbelief. What I once found endearing about his childlike qualities now seemed creepy, especially for a man in his 40s. My colleague said he can live on $300 a month. You must have altered the numbers, he insisted. Exasperated, I replied, well, maybe Lisa, a 22-year-old newbie still living with her parents, can manage with that amount. The mention of her name caught James off guard, and his confidence vanished. Cold sweat started forming as he stood there. I laid out a few pictures and credit card statements on the table. Lisa Johnson, 22, lives with her working dad and stay-at-home mom. After the party for the new employees, one thing led to another with you. I know about your affair that started after you played the gentleman and sent her home. How do you know all this? James asked, shocked. Because she told me herself. What? It's rare for a wife to hear details of an affair straight from the other woman, I said calmly. Oh, I became friends with her on social media. It was easy. I just approached her, saying I too was having an affair. She quickly spilled the beans and even shared photos. But how? James stammered. In the age of information, you've got to be careful. She shared photos like this one. I placed a picture of them in a compromising position in front of him. James, eyes darting around, was sweating profusely. Oh, and she should be receiving one of these soon. Receiving what? He'd asked, clearly nervous. This legal notice, I said, handing him a certified letter. It was an official document my lawyer had prepared while I gathered evidence. As James read through it, his face turned pale. $5,000. I can't afford that. Your father said that amount was reasonable, didn't he? What? You told my parents? Of course. They should be here any moment, I said just as the doorbell rang. I simply replied, come in, to the person on the intercom and return to the living room. Michelle, is everything sorted? Yes, thank you. Right on time, I responded. My mother-in-law stood behind her husband, looking utterly devastated. My father-in-law, usually a calm man, was red with rage. He approached James and landed a solid punch. Ouch! What was that for, Dad? James exclaimed. You're no son of mine, betraying Michelle like that. You're the worst. I'm gonna knock some sense into that rotten character of yours. James was in shock, and frankly, seeing my father-in-law this angry was a first for me too. Now that everyone involved is here, I'd like to resume our discussion. Please have a seat over here, I said, pointing to the chairs I'd set up at the end of the table. My in-laws and the other guests took their seats as instructed. Once everyone was seated, I resumed the conversation with a smile. Now, Lisa, please introduce yourself. I'm Lisa, 22 years old. I'm so sorry. James invited me, and I couldn't refuse. That act is quite enough. Huh. Lisa pretended to cry and kept apologizing, but I cut her off. Caught off guard by my unexpected attitude, she looked shocked. She probably wanted to play the innocent role of a young new hire who couldn't say no to her boss. Unfortunately for her, I knew all about her plans. You told me everything, didn't you? On Instagram, right? Miss Sweet Pea. No way. Lisa turned pale and stared at me as if she had seen a ghost. Her parents looked at her in confusion. I then spread out the printed conversation between Lisa and me on the table for everyone to see. The conversation detailed a shameful account of their affair. Lisa's parents seemed to shift between anger and embarrassment. After a while, her mother stood up and slapped her. Ouch! What was that for? Lisa protested. You told me you were confused because you didn't know he was married and got a legal document about it. What is this? You knew he was married, encouraged him to divorce his wife, and then there's all this trash talk. Lisa's mother seemed very sensitive about the subject and began to tear up. I did feel a bit sorry for her, but it was a mess her daughter had gotten into. Plus, it'd be good for her to know what I'd be talking about next. Also, seeing your husband every day and then hitting on another married man from the same department. That's some stamina. Wait, that's... James's face was filled with disbelief as he listened to my words. When Lisa seemed very flustered, it seemed he realized it was true. Fuming, James stood up, grabbed Lisa by both shoulders, and yelled, You had another man besides me. Who is it? Do you know how much money I spent on you? And you cheat on me, you wretched woman. Hey, you were the one who made the first move on me, even though you have a wife and kids. It's a privilege for you to date a young and cute girl like me. What? How can you be so deluded? Watching the two of them bicker, I sighed. Blaming each other while ignoring their own faults. There's only so much foolishness one can tolerate. It seemed I wasn't the only one who felt this way, Both sets of parents looked utterly dumbfounded. Then Lisa's father, who had been silent until now, stood up. The arguing between James and Lisa stopped immediately. Lisa's father began speaking slowly. "Michelle, I deeply apologize for everything. We want to cover the damages for emotional distress. We know a dairy farmer looking for help, and we'll send Lisa there to work off the debt. She won't leave until she pays us back in full, and we won't provide any assistance. I don't think this makes up for everything, but does this solution work for you?" I nodded. I'd rather not have her name appearing in my bank account every month, so I appreciate your offer. Whether you cut ties with her is up to you. Lisa's father left with Lisa and her mother. As soon as they were gone, I felt a sense of resolution. But then James said something surprising. "Hey, Lisa had me fooled. So, can we start over? I'll do whatever you say." "No, that's fine. I can't stand being with you anymore. Let's get a divorce and I'll be seeking child support and division of assets." "What? No way." James slumped back into his chair, looking dejected. My father-in-law forcefully dragged James out of the house and took him back to their family home. Finally, it was over. Alone in the living room, I took a deep breath, relaxed, and then started preparing dinner for my children, who would be home soon. Later, James and I divorced without any issues. James's parents were furious, and even his mother said she never wanted to see his face again. James was cut off from his in-laws and didn't receive any financial support. He asked if he could pay me in installments, but I refused. As a result, James had to take on debt to pay the alimony. His affair with Lisa was exposed, and while he managed to keep his job, he was moved to a lesser role with a 40% salary cut. With his reduced income and debt to repay, he had to work part-time at construction sites at night and on weekends. As for Lisa, she's working non-stop at a relative's ranch. She used to love cosmetics, but now she's in a place where the only nearby salon is run by elderly women in their 70s. She can't afford makeup or get her nails done. Every day, she laments that things didn't turn out as she expected. She's also being sued for alimony by the wife of another man she had an affair with. It seems her liberation isn't coming anytime soon. As for me, I'm living happily with my 2 kids. My piano lessons have become more popular, and since I started offering evening classes 3 times a week, they've been fully booked by adults wanting to learn piano. My income has steadily increased. I thought my kids would be sad after the divorce, but it turns out I was the only one who felt that way. They even told me, "We like you even more after the divorce, Mom. You're cooler now." That made me a bit happy. Education will cost a lot, but if things continue this way, I'll be able to save enough for my children's future paths. Listening to the beautiful melodies my students play on the piano, my heart dances with excitement for the bright future ahead.
The tension in the dining room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I sat across from Harlan, my estranged husband, trying to keep my emotions in check as he droned on about his grand plans. "This luxury rehab center is going to put our little town on the map," he proclaimed, that slimy grin plastered across his face. "I've got investors lining up to be a part of it." My hands clenched under the table. Of course, his big idea involved lining his own pockets, not caring whose lives he disrupted in the process. "But Harlan," I interjected, struggling to remain calm, "that farmhouse has been in my family for generations. My parents' whole lives were spent tending to that land. You can't just tear it down." Dax and Ivy, my teenage kids, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was the kind of drama no child should have to witness between their parents, but Harlan seemed oblivious to their discomfort. Harlan scoffed, fixing me with that conniving glare that made my skin crawl. "Your parents' legacy?" he spat. "More like a dilapidated money pit holding us back. I've got the chance to finally do something worthwhile with that property." My blood boiled at his cavalier dismissal of everything that house represented to me. My childhood, my roots, my parents' life's work. All he could see was dollar signs. "It's not just about money," I exploded, slamming my palm on the table. Dax and Ivy jumped in their seats. That farmhouse is our family heritage. It means something. Yeah? Harlan's lips curled into a sneer. Well, it's my name on the deed, which means I get to make the calls around here. This rehab center is happening whether you like it or not. Those words felt like a punch to the gut. When had the man I married become such a self-absorbed, greedy bastard? I opened my mouth to protest further, but the dejected looks on Dax and Ivy's faces stopped me. As much as I wanted to continue fighting, I didn't want to put them through any more of this toxic drama tonight. I pushed back from the table, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. You know what, Harlan? Do whatever you want, but don't expect any support from me on this. Snatching up my purse, I stormed out of the dining room, the muffled sound of Harlan's laughter echoing behind me. My fists clenched at my sides as I fought back angry tears. He thought he had won this battle, but he was gravely mistaken. That old farmhouse represented everything my parents had built through decades of backbreaking work, the roots, the memories, the soul of our family. I wouldn't stand by and let Harlan's greed destroy it all in the name of profiting off people's suffering. Not without one hell of a fight. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Harlan was being uncharacteristically low-key, no doubt trying to avoid another bloody-owning match after our disastrous dinner. But I knew that smug snake was just biding his time, waiting for the right moment to slither forward with his precious rehab center plans. I wasn't about to just sit back and take it, though. If he thought he could bulldoze over my family's legacy so easily, he had another thing coming. It started with little things at first. Reevaluating our finances, I noticed irregularities, strange transfers, payments to unfamiliar companies. Confronting Harlan only led to him lashing out, accusing me of nagging and not trusting him. It's basic business dealings, Alara. Not that you'd understand anything about building an empire. Those words stung, but I tried not to let it show. This has nothing to do with trust, Harlan. I'm simply asking where our money is going. He brushed me off with a demeaning chortle. Don't worry that pretty little head of yours. Just let me handle things, okay, dear? The way he always talked down to me, treating me like a clueless child rather than his wife, it made my blood boil. But I knew pushing further would only lead to another explosive argument, so I bottled up my anger. For now. Then came the night I overheard Harlan's conversation with his sleazeball buddy Travis. I'll never forget the smugness in his tone as he bragged about bleeding me dry. Once I've transferred the deed over solely to my name, Alara won't be able to do a damn thing. That little nuisance will be out of the picture for good. My heart stopped. He was planning on cutting me out completely, leaving me with nothing while he tore down my parents' legacy to build his tacky rehab palace. In that moment, any shed of respect or love I'd had left for Harlan evaporated. This was so much worse than I'd imagined. He wasn't just being greedy and inconsiderate, he was being malicious and cruel. Using our marriage vows as a weapon to steal from me and erase everything my family had built. I wanted nothing more than to burst into that room and unleash the fury building up inside me. To scream, to rage, to make him feel 1 ounce of the hurt he was inflicting on me. But I didn't. As the weight of Harlan's betrayal threatened to crush me, a strange calmness washed over me instead. Screaming would only give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten under my skin. No. I would be strong. I would be smart. If he wanted to wage war, then war was what he'd get. Quietly, I retreated back down the hall before either of those snakes could spot me eavesdropping. They thought they were so clever, but they had no idea what was coming for them. A faint smile played across my lips as their chortling laughter echoed behind me. In that moment, I made a vow to myself. Using every ounce of my intelligence and determination, I would take that smug snake Harlan down. He wanted to play dirty? I'd bury him. The next morning, I called a family meeting with Dax and Ivy. It was time to lay everything out on the table and bring them into the fight. Your father has been lying to us, I stated bluntly as we gathered in the living room. He's been secretly plotting to take full control of the farmhouse property. Ivy's eyes widened in shock, but Dax just frowned and nodded slowly. I knew something shady was going on. I overheard him on the phone the other night arguing about handling the Alara situation. My heart clenched hearing my own name being treated like a mere obstacle to be overcome. Harlan's deceit cut deeper than I could have imagined. He's aiming to cut me out completely so he can demolish the farmhouse for his rehab center ambitions. Without any legal claim, there's nothing I can do to stop him. Dax slammed his fist on the couch cushion. That lying bastard! After everything you sacrificed for this family while he was off chasing get-rich-quick schemes, he doesn't deserve. He trailed off, anger causing his voice to shake. We can't let him get away with this, Ivy stated firmly, conviction burning in her eyes. Mom, that farmhouse is your heritage. Grandma and Grandpa's life was in those lands. We have to protect it. Hearing the determination in my daughter's voice, I felt a surge of pride mix with the simmering fury towards Harlan. She may have been young, but Ivy understood the importance of not letting our family history be erased. You're absolutely right, I declared, straightening my back. Which is why I need both of you on board with taking Harlan down. We're going to expose every last one of his underhanded tactics. Dax raised an eyebrow skeptically. And just how do you plan on doing that? Pretty sure dear old Dad has his shady business dealings locked up tighter than Fort Knox. A grim smile crossed my lips. Let's just say I have some tricks up my sleeve, too. Starting with carefully documenting every inconsistency I find in our finances, no matter how small, Harlan always was sloppy about covering his tracks completely. I proceeded to lay out the start of my plan, meticulously building an evidence trail of Harlan's financial manipulation, from questionable payments and transfers to the shady characters he was courting as rehab center investors. Dax was put in charge of thoroughly combing through all communication records, emails, texts, phone calls, looking for any trace of Harlan's deceitful intentions and dealings. Ivy, ever the tech genius, would backtrack all digital money movements to ensure we caught every inconsistency. With her skills, even Harlan's feeble efforts at coding expenses wouldn't be able to hide from us. As we finalized assigning roles and responsibilities, a new sense of determination filled the room. Harlan had clearly underestimated just how ferociously we would fight to take him down. Big mistake. This is going to be one hell of a battle, Dax mused grimly. I met his gaze, letting the full force of my resolve burn through. Then it's a good thing he messed with the wrong family. Harlan wanted a war. He'll get one he never saw coming. With a united front, we shook on our pact. There would be no more holding back. Harlan had awoken a vengeful force he couldn't possibly comprehend. Everything he'd worked towards was about to unravel by his own narcissistic greed. Let the games begin. A few days later, I finally worked up the nerve to confront Harlan directly about his betrayal. I'd spent too many nights stewing in anger, imagining all the ways I could rip him a new one. But I needed to play this confrontation carefully if I wanted to catch him off guard. Harlan, we need to talk, I stated firmly as I entered the den, jaw clenched in determination. He barely looked up from his laptop, offering a dismissive grunt. What is it now, Alara? I'm kind of busy here. I could feel my temper already starting to flare at his indifference, but I took a steadying breath. Don't take the bait. Not yet. Too busy to discuss your secret dealings to cut me out of the farmhouse deed? I asked, carefully watching his expression. That seemed to finally get his attention. Harlan's head snapped up, his brow furrowing in that familiar look of faux innocence he used when caught in a lie. What are you talking about? There are no secret dealings. I leveled him with a cold stare. Don't play dumb with me, Harlan. I know all about your pathetic schemes to take full control of my family's property behind my back. For a split second, I saw a flicker of panic flash across his features before the mask of indignation slid back into place. Alara, you're being completely irrational right now. Can it, Harlan? My composure finally snapped as I slammed my palms on the desk, causing him to flinch back in his chair. I know you've been manipulating the finances, chatting up shady investors, all so you can demolish that farmhouse for your precious little vanity rehab project. Harlan opened his mouth, no doubt to spew more lies and feeble justifications. But I wasn't having any of it, not this time. You make me sick, I snarled, all the rage and anguish I'd been bottling up finally boiling over. Planning to tear down a piece of my family's legacy all along, lying to my face every step of the way. You're nothing but a selfish, immoral snake. He recoiled slightly at the venom in my words, then quickly straightened as that cocky, condescending sneer spread across his lips. Well, looks like the little woman has finally grown some claws. But you don't scare me, Alara. Not even close. Despite the bravado, I could detect a slight quiver of uncertainty in his voice. Good, he should be worried. You think you've got everything all figured out, don't you? Harlan leaned back with a contemptuous chuckle. Newsflash, princess. I don't need your approval or permission to do anything with that property. It's mine, fair and square. My blood boiled at his arrogance. Did he really think underhanded manipulation made his claim fair? But before I could retort, he was leaning towards me with that soulless grin that made my skin crawl. In fact, you're the one who's about to get a rude wake-up call, he promised in a low, silky tone. I've got everything legally locked up tighter than a drum. By the time I'm through, you're going to be the one left with nothing while I build my empire. We were practically nose to nose now, his putrid breath washing over me as he hissed out the final threat. You think you can take me on, sweetheart? By all means, try. But don't be surprised when I bury you along with your precious little memories. It's going to be a bloodbath, and I'm going to enjoy every second of watching you lose everything. Hatred burned in my chest, barely contained rage roiling within me at his vicious, vindictive words. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to unleash the full force of my fury upon this wretched, soulless man I'd once loved, but I didn't. Slowly, I straightened up and took a step back, returning his venom-filled glare with a calm, level look. You seem pretty confident, don't you, Harlan? I stated, my voice dangerously even. We'll see how long that smug smile lasts once the truth about your shady dealings comes to light. You wanted a war? You're going to get one. Giving him one final look of pure, undisguised disgust, I turned and strode from the den, my high heels clicking determinedly against the hardwood. Harlan may have thought he held all the cards, but he had hugely underestimated me. The game was on now, and I fully intended to be the last one standing when the dust cleared. After my explosive showdown with Harlan, I knew I needed to take our fight to the next level. As much as Dax and Ivy's support bolstered my determination, we couldn't take Harlan down alone. We needed reinforcements. First on my list was my best friend Alicia, a sharp-tongued lawyer who had been watching this whole saga unfold with disdain for my snake of a husband. As expected, she jumped at the chance to help take Harlan down a peg. That scumbag has had this coming for a long time, Alicia said with relish when I looped her in on our scheme. Just tell me what kind of legal roadblocks we need to throw his way. Her wolfish grin was one I'd seen many times before, usually right before she went for the jugular in court. Harlan wouldn't know what hit him once we sicked Alicia's legal prowess on his shoddy cover-ups. Next, I reached out to some of my oldest friends from my nursing days, Jacqueline, Maria, and Sandy. While we had drifted apart over the years due to work and raising families, they were still the most loyal, iron-willed women I knew. When I laid out the battle plan, how Harlan aimed to destroy my family legacy in his ruthless pursuit of profits, their reactions were awe-inspiring blend of outrage and grim determination. Say no more, girl, Jacqueline stated, pulling me into a bear hug. That bastard's not going to know what hit him when we're done rallying the troops. Sandy cracked her knuckles meaningfully. I've been waiting years to give that smug prick a piece of my mind, count me in. Maria simply nodded, her jaw set in a hard line. Para la familia. Let's burn that cabron to the ground. With a fiercely loyal crew now assembled, the real planning began. We'd hit Harlan from every angle possible. Alicia laying the groundwork for our legal offensive, while Jacqueline and the others used their vast network of contacts in our small town to rally public opinion solidly against him. Harlan may have his pockets lined with cash, but we've got the most powerful weapons of all, the truth and the will of the people, Alicia declared. Once we expose every last one of his shady schemes, he won't be able to show his weaselly face in this town again. Over the next few days, the fight was taken to Harlan on all fronts. Damning documents and financial records detailing his fraud were anonymously leaked to the local press. Community meetings were organized to rally support for protecting my family's legacy at all costs against Harlan's ambitions. Scathing social media campaigns exposing what a con artist he truly was began spreading like wildfire. At the same time, Alicia was working every back door to halt permits and dispute property claims, throwing up every possible legal roadblock to Harlan's rehab center dreams while we dug up more concrete evidence of his lies and manipulation. As the townsfolk turned decisively against Harlan and his partners started growing nervous over the mounting allegations, you could practically smell the desperation rolling off that weasel. He knew he was losing his grip on the situation, but was too proud and arrogant to gracefully admit defeat. Which was exactly what we wanted. The slimy rat backed into a corner, scrabbling for any advantage as we slowly tightened the vice around his schemes. Of course, the attacks and libelous claims started flying once Harlan realized what an impenetrable defense we had formed. Cries of modern-day witch hunt and embellished accusations that I had grifted money in retaliation were aimed at trying to sow seeds of doubts, but we stood united against the onslaught. Harlan could grasp at whatever pitiful straws of denial he wanted. In a matter of days, we had already dismantled most of his rehab center plans while simultaneously turning almost the entire town against him. He's getting desperate. I noted to Dax and Ivy as news dropped of another one of Harlan's investors pulling out amidst the cloud of suspicion. Getting sloppy, too. My lips curved into a thin, predatory smile, which means his defenses are finally cracking open for our killing strike. Watch closely, kids. This is how we draw the venom from a snake before going in for the kill. The battle was far from over, but the war had finally swung in our favor, and I was going to savor every well-deserved second of Harlan's downfall. It all came to a head at the community center meeting Alicia had organized. Creating a media spectacle was her specialty, and this was shaping up to be her magnum opus of public lashings. As I entered the packed auditorium that night, the stuffy air was thick with anticipation and accusation. All eyes turned towards me, hushed murmurs filling the space as I made my way to the front. The townspeople had gotten wind that explosive revelations about Harlan were coming, and you could feel the thirst for blood in the air. I wasn't alone, however. Dax, Ivy, Alicia, and my former nursing crew stood in solidarity, shoulder to shoulder, as we ascended the stage. We were bathed in the harsh spotlight when I finally stepped up to the podium, casting shadows that danced ominously behind us. Without preamble, I launched right into my opening salvo. Good evening, everyone. I wish I could say I gathered you all here tonight under better circumstances, but the situation we are facing is one of great consequence. My eyes swept the crowd, taking in the rapt expressions locked onto me, before continuing in a voice that carried firmly to the rafters. Many of you are already aware of my husband Harlan's ambitions to demolish my family's ancestral farmhouse in order to build a luxury rehabilitation center. I paused, letting the weight of that statement hang in the air as cries of outrage rippled through the crowd. Seizing the momentum, I pressed on, voice rising with conviction. What you may not know are the depths of deceit, fraud, and manipulation Harlan stooped to in order to make this happen. Evidence we have uncovered shows a long pattern of shady dealings, underhanded tactics, and blatant lies, all in the name of lining his pockets at the expense of our community and my family's heritage. A hush fell over the auditorium as I reached into my blazer pocket and extracted a thick manila folder, holding it aloft for all to see. In here are documents, financial records, communication trails, all detailing Harlan's litany of moral and potentially criminal transgressions, from money laundering and backroom deals with known fraudsters, to pretending to be the sole owner of the property while actively working to cut me out and dissolve my legal claim. Gasps and murmurs exploded around the auditorium, shock and disdain on every face. I pressed my advantage, pitching my voice to be heard over the din. This man is a charlatan and a criminal who has lied, deceived, and undermined every step of the way in his blind greed. Are we going to let his toxicity ravage the very soul of our community while he gets away with it? No. The crowd roared as one, a deafening chorus of outrage. From the side of the stage, I saw Harlan finally stumble in, eyes wild and face flushed. He had clearly caught wind of our little truth rally and come to do damage control. Too little, far too late. You lying bitch, he snarled as realization dawned, fight eyes bulging. You can't do this. I'll bury you for this, I swear. Save it, Snake. Alicia's voice cut through the commotion like a whip crack as she strode forward, holding up a hand to silence the angry mob. "We've got you dead to rights on a laundry list of charges. From shady business dealings to criminal fraud, you're going to be lucky if you don't end up in prison after this is through." Harlan looked around wildly, seeming to finally grasp just how tenuous his situation had become. I watched with cold satisfaction as the blood drained from his face. "Give it up, Harlan," I stated, my voice dripping with contempt. "Your shit show of lies and deception is over. The jig is up. Everyone can see you for the duplicitous, bottom-feeding scumbag you truly are." His mouth worked uselessly for a moment before snarling, pointed a quivering finger at me. You'll regret this, Alara. You hear me? This isn't over by a long shot." But his threats rang hollow, drowned out by a thunderous wave of boos and jeers cascading from the enraged townsfolk. As security finally arrived to escort the ranting Harlan away, I stood tall and fixed him with a look of pure, undisguised loathing. I had dismantled every last one of his lies and defenses. For the first time, he was utterly defenseless against the consequences of his villainy, and I was going to savor every damn second of his well-deserved downfall. After the explosive community meeting, Harlan's world came crashing down in spectacular fashion. You didn't need a crystal ball to see the karmic reckoning that was barreling towards that contemptible snake. Within days, the avalanche of press coverage exposing his vast array of fraud and deception caused a catastrophic domino effect. Investors and business partners scattered like roaches, suspending dealings and distancing themselves from the deepening pit of scandal. Banks froze his assets and lines of credit pending multiple investigations. The rehab center project laid in ruins, all permits revoked amidst the firestorm. And that was just the financial devastation. As the lurid allegations piled up, everything from laundering money for offshore drug cartels to funneling bribes through phony construction funds, the legal walls closed in with terrifying swiftness. Furious investors filed a wave of lawsuits demanding Harlan's head, while the district attorney's office secured a grand jury indictment on nearly 24 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and more. You could practically smell the stench of desperation emanating from Harlan as it all unraveled before his eyes, thanks to his own rampant arrogance and greed. "You'll pay for this, Alara," he'd frequently screech at me in chilling displays of rage, spittle flying. "You'll rue the day you started this war. I'll make sure you end up destitute and alone, living in that piece of crap farmhouse." All I could do was sneer back at his pathetic flailings, enjoying every agonizing second of his meltdown. "Is that so?" I'd reply calmly, basking in his manic fury. "Last I checked, I'm the one who still has custody of the kids, financial security, and the deed to that crap farmhouse you were ready to demolish. You, on the other hand..." I leaned back, eyeing his disheveled, unraveling appearance. "Well, you seem to be doing a fine job of self-destructing all on your own." I'd leave him to stew in his own toxic cesspool of hatred while I moved full steam ahead with reclaiming my family legacy. With Harlan's nefarious ambitions now a smoldering wreckage, it was full steam ahead on restoring the precious farmhouse to its former glory, to honor my parents' memory and provide a revitalizing community gathering place. Of course, Harlan tried every desperate gambit imaginable to regain some semblance of leverage or control. Mostly pathetic smear tactics and attempts to turn Dax and Ivy against me through vile manipulation. But his venom had lost its bite. The kids saw him for the soulless, morally bankrupt specimen he truly was. In the end, his towering ego crippled him when it came time to negotiate custody and divorce terms. While my team played hardball to rightfully secure nearly everything, Harlan was too poisoned by spite to make any logical capitulations. He pathetically tried to contest Alicia's ironclad case for how much punishment he deserved, ranting and raving about unfair treatment as each ruling systematically stripped him of money, property, and professional clout. I'd be lying if I said I didn't take immense satisfaction in watching that surly worm finally receive his comeuppance. It was nothing less than he deserved after so selfishly trying to burn down my family's treasured history in his warpath of greed and vanity. As for me, I rebounded splendidly from the wreckage Harlan left behind. Thanks to the groundswell of local support and Alicia's legal mastery, my claim to the farmhouse was solidified while my nursing credentials remained unblemished. the perfect foundation on which to execute my new vision for the revered property. With the community's help, the farmhouse underwent a transformation into a rustic but vibrant wellness center, offering holistic services, community events, and opportunities for local youth to connect with their rural heritage. A living embodiment of the values my parents instilled in me, allowing their hard-won legacy to be reborn into something even more meaningful. As for Harlan, his fall from grace was as brutal as it was deserved. The walls finally closed in with an 18-year prison sentence after his high-profile trial laid bare the full extent of his sociopathic depravity. His professional reputation was left in permanent ruin, reduced to a cautionary tale. One final delicious bit of karma? Dax and Ivy leveled him with chilling silence when he tried to grovel for their sympathies with smarmy calls from prison, the once infallible master manipulator unable to wriggle his way back into their good graces. After everything, that smug, soulless charlatan got exactly what he deserved, a life torn asunder by his own corrosive deceptions and greed. While I had risen from the rubble he tried to leave me in, creating new hopes and dreams from the foundations he aimed to destroy. Perhaps there was such a thing as justice and karma in this world, after all. All it took was the unstoppable force of a mother's love, fueled by the righteous determination to protect her family's sacred legacy. It was a crisp autumn morning when we held the grand reopening ceremony for the revitalized farmhouse, now christened Willow Creek Wellness Center. Though Harlan's scorched earth campaign had left the property in desperate need of repairs and renovations, we had persevered to breathe new life into my family's cherished legacy. As I stepped up to the podium that day, surrounded by the beaming faces of the townspeople who had rallied behind me, I couldn't help but feel immense pride at what we had achieved together. This wasn't just a new chapter, but a hard-won resurrection from the ashes of Harlan's selfish ambition. To all of you here today, words can't express how grateful I am for your support over these past months, I began, my voice wavering slightly with emotion. When faced with the very real threat of seeing this farmhouse, a piece of my family's heart and soul, torn asunder in the name of greed, you stood united. You stood for the importance of preserving our community's history and values. I paused, feeling Dax and Ivy's reassuring presence beside me as the crowd cheered their affirmation. In that moment, the nightmare of Harlan's betrayal felt like a distant specter, no longer able to diminish this hard-fought victory. Thanks to your resilience and refusal to let corporate excess trample on what makes this town great, we have reclaimed this invaluable space, I continued, fresh conviction rising in my voice. No longer will it serve as a monument to one man's ego, but as a place of healing, of unity, of rediscovering our roots. Willow Creek will be our community's lighthouse, a sanctuary where we can reconnect with ourselves, our neighbors, and the unbreakable threads that have bound us together for generations. More roars of approval and thunderous applause. Despite Harlan throwing everything he had at trying to divide and conquer us, his scorched earth tactics had only galvanized the community's strength and resolve. Karma indeed was a harsh mistress. After the ribbon cutting, I took time to greet and personally thank as many well-wishers as possible. From Alicia, whose legal prowess had been invaluable, to Jacqueline and my other nurses-turned-warriors on the front lines, so many rallied to this cause when Harlan thought he could steamroll right over my family's legacy. Speaking of that wretched snake, I couldn't help but smirk thinking about how he was spending this beautiful day. Rotting in a dingy cell, I'd wager, still trying in vain to wrap his mind around how I'd outmaneuvered him at every single turn. Let him stew and boil over with hatred. I had emerged from his smear campaign completely vindicated, stronger than ever before. And surrounding me now was a living, breathing symbol of that, the culmination of my parents' lifelong efforts and my own perseverance in the face of cruelty. He never stood a chance against you, did he? I turned to see Dax watching me with an odd look of contemplation, perhaps sensing where my mind had drifted. Before I could reply, Ivy sidled up and playfully nudged her brother. Are you kidding? I figured Mom would bury that jackass from the moment his stupid scheme came to light. Oh, ye of little faith, I chuckled, pulling them both into a tight embrace. To be fair, even I wasn't certain I had the fortitude at first to wage this war. But when I saw the two of you standing by me without hesitation, everything became clear. I pulled back, holding them at arm's length as memories of those initial dark days flashed in my mind's eye. When Harlan's true nature was laid bare, when he tried to strip me of my identity and destroy everything our family holds dear, that was when I knew this fight was about so much more than just a property deed. It was about not letting that soulless parasite kill the spirit and legacy your grandparents bestowed on me. Dax and Ivy exchanged knowing looks, seeming to gain a deeper understanding of the cataclysmic forces that had been unleashed. I may have dealt the decisive blows, I continued solemnly, but it was our united front as a family that gave me the strength and determination to dismantle his poisonous schemes piece by piece. Without you two by my side, righting Harlan's wrongs may have broken me. For a long moment we stood in silence, a tear glistening at the corner of my eye as I absorbed the symbolic weight of the sprawling farmhouse campus surrounding us. It would never again serve as a monument to greed, consumed by one man's vanity. No, this place had been reborn, a living, breathing embodiment of the values that could never be erased, no matter how viciously they were attacked. It stood as testament to the unbreakable endurance of family, of truth, and of carving our own legacies in defiance of those who tried to steal them away. And I couldn't have asked for a greater triumph to call my own.